silly as the power of the people's vote. And I think the people should use it to vote for... Say it again! Let me hear it one more time!
So in this video I want to pick up on a point that I made in a previous video, namely that our systems are going to be incapable of solving problems which they themselves have created. And so things like environmental destruction and war and corruption and inequality, these things have always been problems, but technology has now reached the point where we do these things so well, so efficiently, that they've actually become existential threats. And so the time has absolutely come to re-examine the top-down, rule-driven systems that we employ to organize ourselves. And so the top-down, rule-driven, procedural systems that we use are complicated, but the systems that they seek to manage and control are complex. And so what I want to talk about today rests on the incompatibility between our systems, which are complicated, and the natural systems, the people, the societies, the cultures, the natural environment with which they interact. And it is this fundamental incompatibility which creates these problems as forms of pollution, as externalities to the imperfections of the system. Before I go any further, I would like to credit the ideas in this are not at all mine. Jordan Hall and Daniel Schmachtenberger, I've been listening to a lot of their stuff, and they talk a great deal about this. And so, as Jordan would say, insofar as you find this interesting and enlightening, that's entirely down to them, and to the extent to which you find this confusing and pointless, that's my fault. And so I need to begin with an explanation of the difference between the complex and the complicated, for those of you not versed in this kind of thing. So both complex and complicated systems can have lots and lots and lots of independent parts. The fundamental difference between them is that in a complicated system, the relationship of each part of the system to the other parts with which it interacts are very clearly defined. Whereas in a complex system, the relationship between each individual part of the system is not at all clearly defined, because one thing influences another, everything is connected to everything else, whereas in a complicated system that is not the case. And so complicated things are things like cars and aeroplanes and timetables, where you can follow through from beginning to end and see very clearly one step leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. In a complex system, you absolutely cannot do that. You feed something in and essentially anything can come out. I mean, it's not quite like that. They have tendencies and they have ranges, but basically a complex system creates a great deal of randomness and novelty and unpredictability, whereas a complicated system, if you understand it well, is entirely predictable. So that, in a nutshell, is the difference between complex and complicated. And so it is my contention in this video that top-down, rule-driven, procedural, algorithmic systems are incapable of effectively interfacing with natural systems which are complex. And I mean, this occurs at every level. Every organism is complex in its own right. Each ecosystem is complex. Ecosystems link together in complex ways. The complexity is across all scales. And so I'd like to try and illustrate the process, if you will, by use of an example. And the example I've picked is the tax code. Now, the tax code is a very important thing, right? The purpose of the tax code is a solution to the problem of how can very large numbers of people who don't know each other collaborate on things which are going to be good for everyone, and collaboratively provide the resources to undertake these projects. And so that's essentially what the tax system is seeking to do, to equitably get everybody to contribute a fair amount for their circumstances, so that there is enough from the society as a whole to do that which will benefit the society as a whole. That's the idea of the tax code. That's the spirit of it. The tax code would have started out reasonably straightforward, right? But then as societies become more varied and more diverse in their activities, and there are more members of the society, there are more situations, and so the rules of the tax code need to get more complicated to take into account all of the new circumstances which have cropped up. But of course, complex systems have a virtually limitless capacity to throw up novel situations, and so you're always going to get situations where somebody doesn't fit into one category or another that this system has created, and so you start getting arguments, and this is one of the forms of pollution that I'm talking about. You now have disputes, you have resentment, you have bad feeling between the payer of the tax and the collector of the tax. And if you remember that the spirit of the tax code is to collectively do things which are of benefit to all of us, that should not be the case, right? Paying taxes, Noam Chomsky makes this point, that the annual day of paying taxes should be a day of celebration when we get to implement the programs which we have collectively agreed upon. But of course, that is not the case, right? And that's kind of exactly what I'm talking about. So anyway, following on from where I was, the complex system's ability to create novel situations puts a demand on the complicated system to create ever more and more rules and sub-rules and caveats and exceptions and so on, and this makes the tax code so complicated that nobody can navigate it anymore. It's become too cumbersome for anybody to really understand, which means it can now be exploited. Clever accountants, clever lawyers can find loopholes in the tax code so that people can start to legally avoid paying their taxes, and these kinds of tactics are only available to the rich and powerful, and so you now start getting inequity built into the system because the rich people who can afford the clever accountants are not paying anywhere near as much tax as they should do, whereas the poor schlubs who are working every day get tax taken before they even get it in their hands. You know, they don't have to pay it over, they get it deducted at source. And so this is another form of pollution. Yeah? Inequality is exacerbated by this tax code because the rich aren't paying as much as they should, and the poor are paying. An unreasonable burden now goes on to poor people. So that's the basic idea. But then, of course, there's more to it than that, right? As tax revenues increase because the society gets more prosperous, there are more members of the society, so tax revenues increase, government has more money to spend, government gets larger, they find more things to spend money on, military spending goes up, major infrastructure projects go up, vanity projects go up, and so the demand of the state to tax its citizens goes up as well, and so the spirit of the thing at some point gets lost. Instead of it being a collaborative thing for the benefit of all, it's now the government against its citizens trying to extract as much as it can from them. And then, of course, you get to the stage where we're at now, where rich people lobby the government in order to make changes to the tax code so that they can benefit from it. And so this is the sort of final demise, if you like. It makes a nonsense of the whole thing, where those that make the rules can simply change the rules to their advantage at everybody else's expense. It creates resentment, it creates increasing inequality, and it creates, and this is the overall point, creates too much tension between the complex and the complicated. And when the tension between these two things gets too great, it's not the complex which is going to break down. It's been around for billions of years, and that's not the complex that's going to break down, it's the complicated which is going to break down. And this idea of unbearable tension between the complex and the complicated can be seen all over the place. I mean, we've got crises wherever we look. We have a cultural crisis, as evidenced by the dramatic increases in depression and suicide and drug addiction rates. We have a political crisis, as evidenced by the fact that there are far-right parties gaining strength everywhere. We've got authoritarian clowns on both sides of the Atlantic now. We all know we're enduring an environmental crisis where we're wiping out habitats and species at an unbelievable rate, polluting air, sea, river and land as fast as we possibly can. And all of these things are basically exactly the story that I've already described to you. The tension between the complicated systems we use to harness and interact with the complicated become more and more and more messy. The tension between them gets more and more unbearable. The externalities ejected by the complicated into the complex become greater and greater and greater until the complicated breaks down. And it is my belief that we're at the stage now where our complicated institutions are going to start breaking down left, right and centre. And so my hope for none of the above is that we can make a choice. Charles Eisenstein talks about a terrain of peaks and valleys of understanding, and that our current civilization has led us as to the top of the existing peak, right? It's taken us as high as it can. But in order to ascend a higher peak, we first need to descend this one and go down into the valley, down into the unknown. Now that can happen in one of two ways. Either we can wait for all of our systems to collapse around our ears and send us spiraling into chaos, or we can vote none of the above, push this out of the way, clear the table so that we can start having a proper conversation about systems that can be created that can interface effectively with the complex. And by choosing to vote none of the above, we can make that decision to descend into the valley consciously, deliberately, together, with a goal in mind, rather than collapsing into it. Okay, that's, I think, basically all I want to say for this video. Thank you very much for listening.
The only thing not silly is the power of the people's vote. And I think the people should use it to vote for... Say it again! Let me hear it one more time!